In Tibet, you may have noticed there's a hierarchy of sorts. At the bottom lies humans who reap the benefits of the world created for them. Then there are elemental beings, often duty-bound to protect humanity in whatever form they choose to take. The strongest of the elemental beings become gods, and the strongest of the gods become archons, whose role were once to guide humanity and defend their nation. To most in Tibet, this is where the hierarchy ends, for how could there be a higher existence than the Archons? Levels above the Archons, however, are them. The puppet masters of the Archons and the one who tug on the very celestial strings that make up the world. They are the Four Shades, emanations of the Primordial One. Even to the Archons of Tibet, they are known as a higher power. But who exactly are the Four Shades and where are they now? When the Primordial One first came over to Tibet and fought the sovereigns, it created the four shining shades of itself. Let's pause right there just so we're all clear. The Four Shades are emanations of the Primordial One. They came directly from Thanes, yet are still presumably their own separate entities. Each shade represents one of the 5 artifact titles: life, death, time, void, and reason. Yes, I know that leaves one left over, but we'll talk about it later. The Four Shades helped Thanes to defeat the sovereigns and proceeded to reshape Tibet for the arrival of humans. Rivers and mountains were made, before Thanes and the Shade of Life went on to create birds of the air, beasts of the earth, and fish of the sea. The two would go on to create all sorts of flora as well before finally creating humanity. Things would go smoothly for some time until a second war engulfed the thrones, a war so devastating that Enkanomiya sunk beneath the surface and into the darkness. With no light, the people of Enkanomiya begged and prayed to the heavens for help. 2 years would pass until finally one of the shades, Istaroth, the goddess of time and wind, answered their prayers and gave them the knowledge to build the Helios. The final official recorded action regarding the Four Shades once again involves the Shade of Life, who created Egeria to act as the heart for the Primordial Sea when the Hydro Sovereign's heart ceased to function. Unofficially, however, it seems like the final thing the Shades were involved in was summoning the gods and laying waste to Conria, of which one individual who is most certainly a Shade is most prominent in: the Unknown God. Of the Shades we know right now, there is the Shade of Life and the Shade of Time. After conferring with you guys, I've come to agree that the sustainr is the Shade of Void, which leaves 2 archetypes unaccounted for: death and reason. I hate having to talk like this. The issue of there being one less shade than groupings is certainly interesting. I personally believe the leftover artifact type belongs either to the Primordial One or is the sum of all the shades with the Primordial One. However, I'm nearly certain the Primordial One belongs to... How many fucking times did I just say Primordial One? However, I'm nearly certain the Primordial One belongs to Reason due to the fact that the circlet resembles a crown and Thanes is described as having been born with a crown. This leaves the Shade of Death still unaccounted for. I've seen some say that Columbina might be the Shade of Death, and while I don't subscribe to that theory myself due to the fact that it would make her too weak, I did want to bring it up nonetheless. While it's likely the Shade of Death is someone we've yet to meet, there is one shade we know a fair bit about, and that's Istaroth. As mentioned earlier, Istaroth, also known as Cairo, or Tokyo Otaku, is unique in that she was the sole celestial envoy that did not ignore the Enkanomiyan people's cries for help. She granted Abrax the knowledge to construct the cancer machine that is the Danichi Mikoshi, so as to grant them both the sun and the moon. She has dominion over wind and time as demonstrated with the planting of the sacred sakura tree in Inazuma and whatever time manipulation bullshit was going on there. Speaking of Inazuma, Istaroth is thought to be the identity of the statue of the omnipresent god. As the one with control over the wind, she's also been called the Thousand Winds of Time, of which Venti was at one point just one wind spirit. So, in some manner of speaking, she created Venti. So far as we know, Istaroth is the only shade to have received any level of worship amongst them, as she was worshipped by the people of Columbina and then by the people of Mondstadt, both before and after the rise of Barbados. Worship of her eventually faded with time, and she is now but a lost page in the annals of history. Moving on to a shade that's been more active recently is the sustainr, Asmoday, the shade of void. Calling herself the sustainr of heavenly principles, Asmoday is the only member of the heavenly principles who left their mark during the cataclysm 500 years ago. She managed to easily defeat the travelers when they both should have been at full strength. She doesn't seem to be fond of mankind's arrogation, as she put it, which aligns with Celestia's views on the whole matter.
Who are you? The sustainr of heavenly principles. The arrogation of mankind ends now.
Being the sustainr of heavenly principles makes me wonder if Asmoday is the sword of Celestia. While I'm sure all the shades can fight, being the one whose burden it is to keep the ideals in place so much so that your job is to sustain them probably requires you to be apt at fighting at a level second to none. For those wondering how we know she's the shade of void, it's because all the Honkai Impact 3 nerds said so. I used logic and reasoning to assume she was the shade of reasoning, but I was wrong, because something about a Hersher of void, I don't know, they hit me with all that, and I was like, damn nigga, alright, y'all got it. Asmoday has not been heard from since the cataclysm 500 years ago. While information on the shade of life is few and far between, it would be wrong to say we know nothing, for we know she created nearly all life into Vat with the primordial one, and even went on to create Egeria. If you want a shade we know nothing about, then look no further than the shade of death, someone who hasn't been mentioned in any form of anything in the history of anything. The current status of all the shades is currently unknown, but side note, there are 3 females, so you can bet your sweet candy ass they will be playable. I mean, if no one else, Kiana at the very least will. Yay. This is all we know of the shades. Whether they are united currently or divided, or hell, even running Celestia in the absence of Fanes is unknown. But one thing is known, and that's that Kiana is the baddest bitch.